New York, the city that never sleeps, is a place where dreams rise, but also where many dreams are shattered. Clara, a talented singer with a sweet and emotional voice, once had a dazzling music career, a shining star on stages that attracted thousands of admiring eyes. Those performances were proof of her success, of the tireless efforts she put into her journey of following her passion. She had believed that music would take her to the highest peaks in life, bringing happiness not only to herself, but also to her family. But everything Clara had in life suddenly crumbled when David, her beloved husband, passed away unexpectedly in a car accident. He was her companion, her protector, the one who loved her unconditionally for years. The love between them was the greatest happiness for Clara, and her life seemed perfect with David by her side. But that accident took away the man she loved, along with everything in her life. David's death was not only a spiritual loss, but also brought about the decline of her material life. Clara no longer had her partner, nor a stable source of income. She couldn't bear the loneliness and the deep sorrow as the world seemed to turn its back on her. Clara had to scrape by every day, living in poverty, with long days filled with nothing but shame and the fear of the future. For her little daughter Emma, Clara couldn't allow herself to fall. Emma, though only 5 years old, understood her mother's sadness and knew that their lives had changed forever. Clara could only look into Emma's innocent eyes and think that she couldn't let her daughter suffer in poverty and helplessness. But life wasn't easy. Clara had no job, no help from family or friends. She had no one to rely on but herself. However, Clara still had one thing she could not give up: her amazing voice, which she had honed over the years. That voice was not only her pride, but also her last hope to keep going in this cold world. Clara decided to return to music, not to become a big star like before, but to earn a living to support Emma and to hold on to a bit of faith in life. Every morning, Clara would grab her bag, take a worn-out tarp, and head to the crowded streets. These streets had witnessed so many shattered dreams, so much hidden pain, but Clara had no other choice. She stood there, singing while people rushed by. Even though she knew most were just passing by, their expensive handbags, suits, and luxury phones slipping by her face without leaving a trace, Clara still sang. The first notes that came from her cracked lips were her soul's voice, the pain of a mother, of a woman who had lost everything but still refused to give up. Clara sang to break the silence of her lonely days. She sang hoping that someone would stop, listen, and feel the things she couldn't express in words. She sang not for money, not for encouragement or compliments. She sang for Emma, for her daughter's future, for the dream she still held in her heart, even though it had been overshadowed by the great storms of life. She sang because she believed that one day something good would happen, that life could still bring miracles. There were days when no one stopped. There were days when passers-by just dropped a few coins in her hat, and Clara had to hide her tears inside. But not once did she give up. Not once did she forget why she stood there. That voice, though shadowed by pain, still shone a small light, enough to make her believe there was still hope, still a chance, even if it was very small. But one winter day, while Clara was singing her heart out, something unexpected happened. A shiny black luxury car stopped right in front of her. The car wasn't necessarily owned by the rich, but it was a sign of something different. The car door opened, and out stepped a man. His sharp black hair and expensive suit highlighted his perfect appearance. He wasn't like the passers-by, who stopped briefly and then moved on. His gaze upon Clara wasn't just curiosity, but also searching, as if he was looking for something he had lost. Clara couldn't help but be surprised, and then he spoke to her in a deep, warm voice, full of understanding. "Your voice is very special." You can do so much more than this. I can help you. This wasn't an invitation like the casual words of the passersby. This was the offer of a powerful man, someone whom Clara felt, although vaguely, could change her life. In that moment, Clara didn't know how to react. She had heard many empty promises from strangers, but this time, the man's gaze made her feel something different. She wasn't sure about his help, but deep down in her heart, she had a strange belief that maybe this was the opportunity she had been waiting for. Clara looked at the business card the man handed her, feeling that a change was approaching. But was this really what she wanted? Or was it just a trap life had set for her? She didn't know, but Clara understood that a door had opened in front of her, and now she had to decide whether to step through, even though that step was full of risks. Clara stood silently on the sidewalk of the bustling street, the cold wind blowing through her, making her shiver. Her voice echoed in the stillness, filling the empty spaces in her heart. The crowded streets and the people passing by barely paid attention to her. They were rushing to their own lives, too busy to stop and listen to a wonderful voice full of pain. The spare change she received from the passersby was enough to get Emma through the day, but it didn't matter. Clara needed nothing more than hope. Each song she sang wasn't just part of the music, but also part of her soul, a way for her to express emotions that had been suppressed for so long. Clara had sung in many places, but no place was like this street, where she always found a bit of joy, a bit of hope, no matter how difficult life had become. That day, unlike the usual ones, a shiny black car slowly stopped right in front of Clara. The luxury car, gleaming like a strange moon in the dark night, wasn't an ordinary vehicle. It was a symbol of wealth and power. The car door opened, and a man stepped out. Clara couldn't help but stare at him, unable to miss the difference in his gaze, in his demeanor. This man wasn't like the hurried passersby, or those who stopped for a moment before walking away. He stood there, seemingly in no rush, as if he didn't belong to this world. Richard Blackwell stepped out of the car, tall and strong. His black suit fit his body, accentuating the elegance of a powerful man. But what surprised Clara more than his luxury was his gaze. A gaze that held confidence and determination, but also a depth, as though he was searching for something in these moments. It was the gaze of a man who had conquered everything in life, yet still lacked something very important. He walked closer to Clara, and only then did she realize she was looking at a man unlike any other. His attraction wasn't because of his appearance or wealth, but because of something real, something powerful in the way he looked at her. Clara could feel the difference in him, a resonance she had never felt before. She hesitated, but then bent down to take the business card from his hand, feeling a curiosity she couldn't quite explain. Richard smiled lightly, but it wasn't a fake or polite smile. It was a smile that held sincerity, as if he had noticed something in her. "Your voice is amazing," he said, his voice deep with a touch of contemplation. "You could do so much more than this. I can help you if you want." Clara looked up at him, questions suddenly rushing through her mind. Who was this man? And why was he standing here, offering to help her when his life seemed so perfect? Clara sensed the difference between his words and the casual encouragements she had received from strangers before. This wasn't an offer born out of pity. It was a serious proposal. But doubt still filled Clara's mind. She didn't trust strangers easily, especially those who said they wanted to help without any clear reason. She had been let down by life so many times, and sometimes trusting others only brought disappointment. But something in Richard's gaze made it hard for her to refuse. "Thank you," Clara replied, her voice soft and hesitant. "But I don't think I can accept help from a stranger. I don't know who you are, and I don't know if this is really good for me and my daughter. Richard stood silent for a moment, as though pondering Clara's refusal. But instead of showing disappointment, he simply smiled, a smile full of patience. I understand your hesitation, but I'm not a stranger. I'm someone who can help you find what you've lost. I just want you to understand that the opportunity is right in front of you. You don't have to fight this battle alone anymore. Clara looked at him, part of her wanting to reject the offer, but another part of her feeling like this was an opportunity she couldn't let slip away. Her daughter needed a better future, and maybe if she didn't seize this chance, she would continue living as before, struggling and alone. Do you really want to help me? Clara asked, her voice slightly uncertain, as if confirming once more. Yes, Richard answered firmly. I can help you, but only when you're ready to accept the help. Clara couldn't deny that she felt something sincere in Richard's words, but it was also because of this sincerity that she felt uneasy. Her life had changed too much in recent times, and she didn't know if she could trust a man like him. She looked into Richard's eyes, sensing his sincerity, and then, for reasons she couldn't explain, she extended her hand to take the business card. Richard silently observed her, then turned back to his car. Contact me when you've made your decision, he said before the car door closed and the vehicle sped off into the darkness. Clara stood there, in the middle of the busy street, tightly holding the business card. She didn't know whether she should call him or not, but part of her felt that this was the turning point she had been waiting for. Something within her urged her not to let this opportunity slip by. But one question still lingered in her mind. Was she ready to let her life change completely? Clara looked down at the business card, reading the name and phone number. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But maybe, just maybe, this life still had something to offer her, an opportunity, even if it came from a powerful man she didn't know. Clara sat in her small room, her fingers absent-mindedly twirling the business card Richard Blackwell had given her. A week had passed since their unexpected meeting. Every night, she picked up the card, looked at the name, and each time, her heart stirred with an indescribable unease. Could she trust this man? Was his offer of help truly out of kindness, or just a power game she couldn't quite understand? Since her husband's death, Clara had stopped trusting anyone. The repeated failures and empty promises had built invisible walls around her heart. But her daughter, Emma, was the only reason she didn't give up. And perhaps this was the only chance she had to give her daughter a better future. So, one morning, when the sunlight streamed through the small window of her room, Clara decided to call Richard. Hello, this is Clara. I've been thinking a lot about your offer, she said, her voice trembling but determined. I'm glad you called. I thought you'd make this decision, Richard replied, his voice gentle yet full of confidence. Come meet me. I have a plan. We'll make everything better. Clara felt a slight anxiety, but there was also a strong urge inside her, compelling her to not refuse. She wanted to give herself a chance. More than anything, she wanted Emma to have a better life, even if it meant stepping into a world she had never imagined. When Clara entered Richard's office for the second time, the space once again overwhelmed her. Expensive paintings, exquisite decorations, and the glittering luxury made Clara feel as though she had stepped into an entirely different world. Richard Blackwell wasn't just a wealthy man. He was someone who held the kind of power and influence Clara had never had access to. Richard sat behind a large desk, looking at her with a determined gaze. I think you're ready. I'll help you get back what you've lost, and more. I'll help you rise, he said, his voice persuasive. Clara sat down opposite him, unable to shake off the tension she felt. But there was something in Richard's eyes that made it hard for her to refuse. He wasn't like the men she had met throughout her life. He had confidence, strength, and a deep understanding of what she was going through. Clara could sense that Richard didn't just want to help her. He saw an opportunity in her, an opportunity for change, to do something great. Your voice isn't everything, Richard continued. You have something bigger than that. You're capable of more, but you need support, and I'm here to help you. Clara looked into his eyes, feeling like she was being drawn into the determination and sincerity of his words. But she couldn't ignore the conditions he had set in their first meeting. Something in his words made Clara feel uncomfortable, but she couldn't deny that if she didn't accept his help, she wouldn't have a brighter future. You're right, Clara replied gently. But if I agree, what do you want me to do? Richard smiled slightly, his eyes lighting up as though he was about to reveal an important secret. I want you to use your voice for something greater. I have a big music project coming up, and I want you to be the star. But in return, I need your commitment. You'll work with me, and I will make sure that you and Emma will never have to worry about money again. Clara was silent for a moment. This was an opportunity she couldn't miss, but it was also something she had to pay a price for. Could she entrust herself to a man like Richard? Did he truly want to help her, or was this just a business strategy, a way for him to attract attention and profit? You could think about it a little more, Richard said, noticing Clara's hesitation. But don't forget, opportunities don't always stay. If you agree, we can start right away. Clara didn't respond immediately. She stood up, looking out the window of Richard's office. The fading afternoon light slowly covered the city, and in that look, Clara saw a flicker of hope. She looked at her hands, the hands that had held a microphone, created music, and lived for music. She remembered the performance nights, the dreams that once shone brightly in her heart. Now, she had to decide whether to accept this help and continue chasing those dreams, or leave them behind and continue the life she was living as a single mother with small hopes. Clara turned back to look at Richard, feeling the determination in his gaze. I agree, she said, her voice serious. Richard smiled, and a feeling of relief seemed to envelop the room. Good. Let's start right now. That day, Clara not only entered into an agreement, but also stepped into a new life. A life where she didn't know where it would lead, but she believed that, at least now, there was someone by her side, helping her, and most importantly, believing in her. Clara entered the world Richard had opened up to her, but gradually she realized that everything was not as glamorous as he had painted it. The first few days under Richard's patronage went smoother than she had expected. She was accepted into the music project he had promised, and everything seemed to be gradually improving. Emma was enrolled in a prestigious private school. The worries about finances slowly faded, and Clara began to notice significant changes in her life. However, as the outer layers of generosity and support were peeled away, a terrifying truth was slowly revealed. One late afternoon, while Clara was sitting in Richard's recording studio, finishing some tracks for the new music project, she happened to overhear a conversation over the phone with Richard. Everything started when she heard a strange exchange between Richard and a man with a gravelly voice, whom she had never met. At first, she didn't pay much attention, thinking it was just a normal work call, but what she heard made her unable to continue working as usual. Yes, everything is ready. She is completely under control. Richard's voice rang out confidently on the phone, without hesitation. She has no idea that everything she does will serve us. Everything has been planned. The whole space fell silent for a moment, and Clara felt a cold chill envelop her. And once she signs this contract, everything will be complete. Everything in her life will belong to us. Clara couldn't listen any further. She hurriedly stood up, stumbling out of the studio, trying to hide the panic welling up inside her. She didn't know what to do with the information she had just heard. Everything suddenly became unclear, But one thing was very clear in her heart. She had just overheard a conspiracy. A conspiracy in which she was the central character. She couldn't let this pass by as an accidental overhearing. Clara decided she had to investigate further. She tried to remain calm, but couldn't stop thinking about Richard's words. She had fully trusted him, but now, everything seemed to be falling apart. She knew she had to face the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. Clara began searching for information about Richard and his connections, but it wasn't as easy as she thought. He was a very secretive person, always protecting everything around him with layers of perfect facades. However, Clara didn't give up. She found ways to access the company records Richard had managed, and from there, she began to uncover illicit connections. The companies Richard managed were not just about music or investment. In fact, they were involved in shady financial activities, dealings with international criminal organizations, and one of those involved money laundering through the music products she was participating in. Each time Clara flipped through the documents, each time she came across a new piece of information, the pieces of the perfect picture Richard had painted began to turn into dark, shadowy fragments. The more she dug, the more she realized that she was being pulled into a dangerous game that she couldn't easily escape. Clara was the main character in the story Richard was orchestrating, but not the one he intended to help. She was just a pawn in a power game that she had no idea about. One day, while searching for documents in Richard's office, Clara happened to discover a small metal box at the bottom of a drawer. She opened it and found a series of contracts, papers related to asset transfers, along with recordings and bank documents linked to international transactions. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Suddenly, Clara felt an overwhelming fear spread through her body. These papers weren't just ordinary documents. They were proof of a global plan being carried out right under her nose. One particular contract confused Clara the most. It was an agreement with an international organization where Clara was required to sign onto a global music project she had been involved in. But when she carefully examined it, Clara realized that this wasn't just a normal project. According to the terms, this project would generate massive profits from criminal activities, and Clara would never have ownership of anything she contributed. The truth was becoming clearer, and Clara felt like she was standing on the edge of a precipice. She was a pawn in the game Richard had set up, and worse, she was being used to launder money for a massive criminal network. Clara could no longer bear it. She couldn't let herself continue being a tool in the hands of a man like Richard. This discovery not only changed everything Clara thought about life, but also changed how she viewed Richard. He wasn't the generous man she had imagined. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing, exploiting her at every turn. Every time she sang, every time she recorded for the project, she was taking another step deeper into a conspiracy she had never anticipated. With everything she had discovered, Clara no longer had time to hesitate. She had to act. She had to escape the web Richard had set for her. And as a cruel twist of fate, she realized that the very beautiful voice she had always considered her only asset had now become a tool in the hands of a man she could never predict. Clara had to find a way to regain control of her life, but she knew that to do so, she would have to face challenges far greater than anything she had imagined. Clara couldn't sleep that night. The images from the metal box she discovered in Richard's office kept haunting her. She couldn't believe what she had uncovered. A sense of fear and unease filled her mind, preventing her from stopping the thoughts of what her next move should be. Every document, every contract clearly showed that she had been drawn into a criminal conspiracy from which she couldn't easily withdraw. But the more she thought about it, the more Clara realized that the longer she hesitated, the deeper she would become trapped in Richard's web and the people behind him. After hours of sleeplessness, Clara decided to take action. She couldn't continue living in uncertainty, couldn't continue letting Richard control her life. But escaping was not going to be easy. Clara knew that if she made the wrong move, not only would her life be at risk, but Emma's as well. Richard was no fool. He was a shrewd player, and when he felt betrayed, it wouldn't be surprising if he destroyed her to protect his secrets. The next morning, Clara began preparing for her escape. She didn't have much time. The information she had gathered from the metal box was enough for Richard to realize that she was suspicious and investigating him. Clara knew she couldn't wait any longer. Her decision was to leave, to escape before it was too late. But she couldn't go alone. Emma, the only one Clara cared about, had to be protected. She couldn't let her daughter get caught in this storm. Clara hurriedly packed essential items, folded clothes, and put all important documents into her handbag. She couldn't take much, but at least she had to have the things that mattered, the things that could help her start a new life. Once everything was ready, Clara stood by the window, gazing outside with a sorrowful look. She knew she was doing the right thing, but her heart was still filled with anxiety. Would she be able to escape Richard? Could she create a new life without living in fear for the rest of her days? As Clara descended the stairs, the footsteps echoed in the quiet of the mansion. Every step she took felt heavy, as if she were leaving a part of herself behind. She didn't know what she was doing. She only knew she couldn't continue living as a puppet in Richard's hands. She had to find a way out. When Clara reached Emma's room, she gently opened the door and saw her daughter sleeping soundly in her small bed. The sight made her heart ache. Emma was the only reason Clara still had the strength to fight. She quietly woke Emma, whispering in her ear, "We're going somewhere else, Emma. We're not coming back here." The little girl opened her eyes, confused, but quickly realized that everything was changing. Running away was a risky decision, but Clara had no choice. She placed her hand on Emma's shoulder and led her outside. Both mother and daughter crept out of the mansion, making no noise. Clara paused for a second, looking around as if sensing something was wrong. A strange feeling rose in her chest, as if someone was watching her every step. When they reached the gate, Clara immediately knew that the worst had happened. A sleek black car stopped right in front of them. Clara felt the tension immediately. The car door swung open, and Richard stepped out, his face cold and determined. He looked at Clara, and his gaze felt like a warning. She couldn't escape. "Clara," Richard said, his voice low, "you can't leave like this. What do you think you can do? Do you really think you can run away from everything I've built for you?" Clara froze but didn't submit. She looked Richard straight in the eye, refusing to let him see the fear in her. "I don't want any part of your plan anymore, Richard. I know everything, and I can't keep helping you with these evil deeds." Richard didn't say anything, but Clara could see the anger rising in his eyes. He stepped closer, his voice low and menacing. "You don't know what you're doing. If you leave now, you'll never have peace. We've given you everything you wanted, and now you're planning to betray us." Clara could feel the danger in Richard's voice, but she couldn't go back. She had to leave. She and Emma couldn't continue living in this control and fear. Clara grabbed Emma's hand, ready to run, but just then, a group of men stepped out of the car. They were Richard's henchmen, always ready to carry out his orders. Clara and Emma were surrounded, and in that moment, Clara felt her heart stop. But at that very moment, she knew she couldn't surrender. She couldn't let it end like this. She looked around, searching for any opportunity. And then, in a brief moment, she saw a gap between the men surrounding them. Clara pulled Emma's hand and rushed forward. The chase began. Clara didn't have time to think. She just ran as fast as she could. The footsteps behind her grew closer, but Clara didn't stop. She knew this was a deadly escape, but she also knew that if she stopped, she and Emma would have no chance of escaping Richard's grip. Each street, each alley in the city became a path to salvation. Clara barely had time to race past tall buildings, the dim lights of New York serving as a bleak backdrop for her desperate flight. Everything became blurry, except for the footsteps of Clara and Emma, and the footsteps pursuing them, relentless and unyielding. Finally, when Clara felt her strength waning, she saw a taxi ahead. She pulled Emma's hand and ran towards it, breathlessly saying to the driver, "Go. Go now." The driver didn't have time to react, but Clara didn't care. She and Emma jumped into the car, and the taxi sped away like a lightning bolt, leaving the shadows chasing them behind. But Clara knew that this was just the beginning of a larger battle. This escape was not only about escaping Richard, but also about the journey to reclaim freedom and uncover the truth about what was really happening. She and Emma could not live in fear forever, and Clara swore that she would never let Richard or anyone else turn her into a puppet in their hands again. That night's escape marked a turning point for Clara, one from which there was no turning back. After leaving Richard's mansion, she and Emma had nowhere to go, no safe place to seek refuge. But Clara knew something monumental had begun. She had not only escaped Richard, but she had also discovered a strength within herself that she had never realized. She could no longer live in the shadows, constantly facing doubt and fear. She had to do something. She had to confront the situation and bring the truth to light. Clara began her journey with the first steps of connecting the pieces of the story that Richard had kept hidden. Emma was the only reason Clara continued fighting, but it was also Emma who helped her realize that if she wanted to protect her daughter, she had to resolve this issue once and for all. The secrets Clara discovered in Richard's office were not just documents about illegal transactions. She began to notice that perhaps those around Richard, people she had once thought of as friends, were actually accomplices in a vast criminal network. And if she wanted to expose this conspiracy, Clara needed to find allies. She started with those she trusted most, the people who had stood by her during difficult times. Clara reached out to an old friend from the music industry, someone with deep connections to many in the field, but also someone with a zero-tolerance stance against wrongdoing. His name was Alex, and Clara knew he was the only one who could help her investigate Richard's shady dealings without being detected. Clara and Alex met in a quiet cafe, where they could talk without fear of being watched. Clara shared with Alex what she had discovered, the documents, contracts, and the conspiracy Richard had set in motion, using her in illegal financial dealings. Alex was not surprised. He had heard rumors about Richard, but had never had enough evidence to prove his suspicions. However, with the information Clara brought, everything began to fall into place. Alex knew that if they didn't act quickly, not only would Clara be in danger, but many others would also be swept into this power play. With Alex's help, Clara began to connect with others in the music industry and media, people who could help her expose the truth. But finding trustworthy people wasn't easy. Richard had built a solid network of allies, from the rich and powerful to large music organizations. Every move Clara made had to be calculated, because she knew a small mistake could ruin all her efforts. One of the important allies Clara found was Sarah, an investigative journalist, known for her reports on financial crimes. Sarah had the ability to gather evidence and expose secrets that others tried to hide. She had previously written major articles exposing criminal organizations, and Clara knew that if she wanted to bring the truth about Richard to light, Sarah was indispensable. Clara and Sarah met in a secret meeting. Clara handed Sarah the document she had found, and together they began working to expose Richard's conspiracy. But what Clara didn't expect was that Sarah not only had a clear vision of the situation, but also connections with law enforcement. people who could help bring the criminals to justice. With Alex and Sarah's assistance, Clara began planning to gather more evidence. She couldn't just rely on the documents she already had. She needed to dig deeper, find weaknesses in Richard's system and the people supporting him. They decided to work in secrecy, not letting any traces slip to Richard. But as each day passed, Clara felt herself being increasingly watched. Richard was no fool, and Clara could sense he was actively searching for her. Day after day, Clara, Alex, and Sarah put all their energy into gathering evidence. They had important documents, but they were still missing the most crucial piece: a testimony from someone within Richard's inner circle. This was the breakthrough Clara needed to dismantle Richard's entire conspiracy and bring everything to light. Sarah had found a vital source, a former employee at Richard's company, who had left after discovering illegal activities. This person was willing to provide important information, but only if his life could be protected. Clara and her team planned to meet this person at a safe location, a moment where they could gather the testimony without being watched. It was a risky decision because Clara knew that every move had to be calculated. If Richard discovered this, everything could end in disaster. The meeting took place in the darkness of an abandoned warehouse, where no one else was present. Clara felt her heart race as she saw the man step out from the shadows, his face hidden behind a cap and dark glasses. He was once part of Richard's team, but had left after uncovering the illegal actions. He didn't hesitate to recount what he had witnessed: secret transactions Richard had made, money being laundered through the music projects Clara had been involved in. This information was the key evidence they needed to expose the truth. The following days were filled with tense meetings, secret calls, and evidence hunting. Clara and her team knew time was running out. Richard had realized someone was investigating him, and he was becoming more cautious. Clara had to act quickly. Otherwise, all her efforts would be in vain. Finally, they were ready. With the evidence in hand, Clara, Alex, and Sarah decided to go public with the truth. A well-planned media campaign was put into motion. Sarah's articles were released, and information about Richard and his criminal activities was brought to light. Everything had been carefully prepared, and now Clara had one final step to take to completely shatter the wall Richard had built. The truth about Richard Blackwell and the criminal conspiracy he had orchestrated was no longer secret. But Clara knew that this victory was just the beginning, because the battle was far from over. And one question still echoed in her mind. Would she be able to protect Emma, protect everything she had worked for, in a world filled with so many dangers? When Clara saw the first news about Richard Blackwell's downfall, she didn't feel the joy of victory. All she felt was an emptiness, a sensation that had become all too familiar since David's passing. Everything around her seemed to be changing, but Clara knew that despite winning this battle, the road ahead would still be filled with challenges. The truth about Richard had been exposed. The criminal network he built was no longer a secret, but the price Clara had to pay to bring everything to light was enormous. She was no longer the woman who dreamed of a dazzling music career. Clara, once someone who had it all, was now left with only the shattered pieces of a dream. She had lost not only her reputation, but also the sense of security she once had. Every step in life now was calculated, each decision carefully thought out, because she knew she couldn't afford to make another mistake. Emma looked at her mother with concern, still not fully understanding what had happened, but Clara could see her daughter growing up more each day. She was no longer the dreamy child she once was. Clara knew that now. Emma was her greatest motivation. Her love and protection for her daughter were the only reasons Clara remained strong, even as everything around her crumbled. Although Richard had been arrested, The consequences Clara had to face were not something she could resolve overnight. Richard's criminal network still existed, and the accomplices involved weren't going to give up so easily. Clara realized that confronting the remaining members of Richard's organization wouldn't be simple. The only way she could protect herself and Emma was to start from scratch, to live a life where no one could control or exploit her. But how to start over? Clara was no longer the confident woman, the famous music star, and had no money to her name. All the assets and opportunities she once had were gone. She could no longer live in the shadow of the past. Clara had to reinvent herself, find a new path, one that no one could take away from her. She could no longer rely on others. She had to take control of her own life, and that meant starting from the beginning. To do this, Clara decided to return to music, but this time not as someone under someone else's patronage. She would stand on her own feet, needing no help other than her own. Clara began writing new songs, songs that were no longer influenced by shady contracts or manipulation. These songs weren't just music. They were her way of cleansing the wounds in her soul. She wrote about suffering, betrayal, but also about hope and rebirth. But music wasn't the only road Clara had to walk. She needed to confront her past and the consequences it had left. Clara decided to seek out a psychologist to help her overcome the haunting memories. She didn't want the memories of Richard, of what had happened, to continue haunting her for the rest of her life. Clara's mind had been deeply scarred, and she knew that if she didn't heal her wounds, she would never truly be able to live. Each day, Clara regained her composure. She began to understand that not all bad things could make her fall. The failures of the past weren't an end, but just part of the long journey she had to overcome. She decided not to let the past control her anymore. Clara learned to accept her mistakes and learn from them. She understood that no one could change the past, but every decision in the present could create a new future. One morning, when Clara looked in the mirror, she no longer saw a tired, sorrowful woman, but a strong, resilient woman who had fought through great challenges and overcome them. Clara realized that her life still had many things worth waiting for. She didn't need help from Richard or anyone else to stand strong. She would rebuild everything from scratch with self-reliance, determination, and belief in herself. With each new step, Clara felt herself getting closer to the goal she had set, to create a new life, one not bound by the past, not controlled by others. Clara had decided that she would live for herself, for Emma, and for the dream she had never given up on. She was ready to face the future, no matter how difficult or challenging it might be. In the end, Clara understood that every day, every hour, every minute was an opportunity to start over, to decide again. Life would not always be easy, but one thing Clara knew for sure: she would never give up the life she truly deserved. After all the storms, Clara finally found peace within her own soul. The days of running away, the sleepless nights filled with fear and confusion, now seemed to fade into the past. She looked ahead, sensing that a new light was shining upon her life. Both she and Emma had weathered the storms of life, and now they stood on the edge of a fresh new beginning. Life was no longer a string of gloomy days, but a blank page on which Clara could write her own story. The first step in this journey was her decision not to let anyone, whether Richard or anyone else, control her life anymore. Clara was starting over, but this time not with the overwhelming fear she had before, but with new hope, with faith in her own abilities. Clara knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was no longer the weak woman, easily deceived as she once was. She had learned how to stand firm, how to accept herself, and how to face challenges instead of avoiding them. Throughout these months, She had worked tirelessly to learn, to start fresh, and now she was reaping the rewards of all those efforts. The most important thing to Clara now was Emma. Her daughter had witnessed her overcome many hardships, seen her rise after every fall, and Clara knew that what she did was not just for herself, but for her daughter's future. Each day, Emma became stronger, and Clara also realized that she had built a solid foundation for her daughter to face life. Emma was Clara's greatest motivation, keeping her from giving up, allowing her to keep moving forward despite knowing that the path ahead would still be full of challenges. One of the important decisions Clara made during this time was to relaunch her music career. But this time, Clara wasn't going down the same path. She wasn't signing contracts with big music companies, no longer allowing herself to be bound by the contracts Richard had imposed on her before. Clara began producing her own music, writing her own songs. Her songs were no longer just music, but her voice, a strong voice, a message of resilience and inner strength. With the help of Alex, a former friend in the music industry, Clara began to release her first tracks. This time, her music wasn't for profit, but to share her own story, a way for her to help others realize that they were never alone in the battle of life. Clara's songs were warmly received. Even without big promotional campaigns, it was the honesty in every lyric, the depth of emotion she conveyed, that made the listeners feel that every note was a part of Clara herself. In addition to her music, Clara also began participating in charity programs where she could help women and children in need, those who, like her, had struggled to find their way in the world. Clara realized that helping others wasn't just a way for her to heal her own wounds, but also a way to make a significant change in society. She had become a symbol of hope, strength, and belief in change. Every time Clara saw those she had helped stand strong, walking confidently, she felt a profound joy in her heart. Not long after, Clara received attention from some independent music producers who recognized her talent and wanted to collaborate with her on music projects. But this time, Clara was no longer blindly chasing the promises of the wealthy and powerful. She knew how to protect herself, how to choose the right partners, those who truly valued her talent and creativity. Clara began to build an independent music career, not bound by anything other than her passion and belief in herself. During this time, Clara and Emma moved into a small but cozy house, a place without the shadows of past storms, where they could start a new life. The house wasn't big, but it was enough for the two of them to feel safe and happy. Clara felt a peace she had never known in all those years. She knew she was in the right place. One morning, as Clara sat in the small garden of their new home, watching the first rays of sunlight touch the earth, she felt a happiness she had never experienced before. She had lost so much, but it was through those losses that Clara realized the value of what she had. No longer haunted by the past, no longer afraid when thinking about the future, Clara knew she had found her own path, a path no one could take away from her. Emma ran to Clara, placed her hand on her mother's shoulder, and looked at her with eyes full of love. Clara smiled and comforted her daughter. She didn't need anything more. Their new life had begun, and with love and hope, they would build a bright future together. Clara understood that hope wasn't something vague, but an invisible strength she had found within herself. And that was the most important thing, the only thing she needed to continue this journey. Clara's story is not just a journey of overcoming hardships, but also a profound lesson on the power of the human spirit when faced with adversity. It is a story about resilience, about finding light even in the darkest moments of life. From being a talented singer, a woman who loved her family, to losing everything and starting over from scratch, Clara has proven that no matter how harsh life may be, we can always rise, rebuild from within ourselves and from the rubble of the past. Clara fought not only with external challenges, but also in an ongoing battle within her own soul. The loss of her husband, the betrayal by someone she considered close, and the dark secrets created by Richard and his accomplices forced Clara to face herself and find strength within. She had to overcome long nights filled with fear, painful moments of not knowing whether she could escape the shadow of her past. However, from this, she realized that true strength does not lie in fighting others, but in fighting herself against fears, doubts, and failures within. Clara learned that sometimes letting go of what has been lost is the way to take control of your life. She once lived in the shadow of unfulfilled dreams, in fear of being manipulated by those around her. But when she decided to throw off those heavy stones and walk on the path of self-reliance, she found true freedom. Clara's story is proof that if we have the courage to face the truth, no matter how painful, we will find the path to liberate ourselves. But the greatest lesson Clara brings to us is the strength found in love and perseverance. Love is not always what we hope for, but it is the greatest motivation that helped Clara overcome every challenge. The love of a mother for her daughter, the love of a woman for herself, and the love for dreams she never gave up on. Every step Clara took, no matter how painful or difficult, was driven by love. Emma, her little daughter, was the reason Clara never gave up, the reason she always found the strength to rise each time she fell. And from this love, Clara not only conquered herself, but also triumphed over forces she once thought insurmountable. The story also shows that in life, sometimes we must learn to face uncomfortable truths. Richard was not the only villain in the story. It was the illusions and false beliefs Clara had placed in others. She lived part of her life in blindness, thinking she could rely on those around her to protect her. But when the truth came out, she realized that only she could protect herself. This is an important lesson for all of us. Sometimes, to move forward, we must have the courage to face the truth, even if it shatters beliefs built over many years. Not only is this Clara's story, but also serves as a reminder of the power of rebirth. Every time we fall, we have the opportunity to rise again and start new. Clara didn't let the failures of the past become barriers to her progress. On the contrary, she learned to see those falls as valuable lessons, using them to rebuild her life. The rebirth in this story is not a miracle or a magical transformation, but the determination and courage not to give up in the face of difficulties. Another profound message of the story is the search for and rebuilding of hope in life. When everything seems to have ended, when the past weighs heavily and the future is unclear, we can still find light if we dare to take a step forward, even a small one. Clara not only regained hope for herself, but also for Emma, for those who are facing circumstances like hers. Hope is not a vague thing, but an invisible strength that can change everything, heal the wounds in our souls, and give us a reason to keep going. Ultimately, Clara's story is a reminder that every life is valuable, and change can only begin from within each of us. We may not be able to change the world, but we can change how we perceive and live our lives. Clara changed, not just because of what happened, but because she chose to change herself to become the person she always wanted to be. She was no longer a miserable woman, but a strong woman who knew how to create her own future and overcome every challenge. This story is not only Clara's, but also ours. Those of us who are searching for light in the darkness, those walking the path to rediscover ourselves, and those learning to move past the past in order to move forward.